The story of Dr. Ben Carson is a story of overcoming, persevering, and achieving the seemingly impossible. It is the story of a young mother with only a third-grade education who planted a vibrant love of learning and the seeds of the Christian faith in her two young sons. It is the story of a boy with the childhood dream of becoming a physician who reached beyond his meager circumstances in Detroit to attend Yale University on a full tuition academic scholarship. It is the story of a poor college graduate who was determined to achieve his dream and worked as an X-ray technician, a bank teller, and even a school bus driver before he was finally accepted into the medical school of the University of Michigan. It is the story of a brilliant and determined neurosurgeon who became the first doctor to successfully separate Siamese twins, just one of his many groundbreaking procedures during his 29-year tenure as the director of pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins University Medical Center in Maryland. It is the story of a presidential candidate campaigning for religious liberty, limited government, freedom of opportunity in education, the right to bear arms, a balanced federal budget and tax reform, the right of families to make their own decisions about health care and medical treatment, traditional marriage and family, and the sanctity of human life from conception. In other words, the story of Dr. Carson is the story of the American dream. Colorado Christian University and the Centennial Institute are honored to welcome Dr. Carson as he describes how he will lead our nation if we, the people, elect him to be the next president of the United States. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ben Carson.
For space skies, for embers of
Thank you very, very much. Candy and I are absolutely delighted to be here at Colorado Christian University, a bastion of morality in today's society. And sometimes it takes courage, quite frankly, today, to be someone who stands up for principle. It's very problematic in our society right now. And one of the reasons that I decided to get into this, against my intense desire to retire and to relax after 15,000 operations and 36 years of 12 to 16-hour days with lots of stress. But it does prepare you well for this. There's no question about that. But it was because I was afraid that we were starting to lose a part of who we were as Americans. And part of that was our freedom to live as we wish, to live by our faith, to live by our beliefs, to speak about what we want to speak about. But what has happened is, people have been beaten down. Because, see, the vast majority of Americans are logical people with common sense. But they have come to discover that if you say certain things, that you're going to be polarized. You're going to be called names. You're going to get an IRS audit. Somebody's going to mess with your job. You're going to be ostracized. Well, here's the problem. That's exactly what the secular progressives want you to do. Because they don't care whether you agree with them or not, as long as you sit down and shut up. That is the key. And it's time for people to stand up for what they believe in. That is what will save America. And we must also recognize that we are so fortunate to live in this country. I mean, I've visited 57 countries, and, I enjoy going to other parts of the world and seeing sights, but I got to tell you, I am always delighted to be back here again and to put my feet on the ground here. There is no other place like America. It's a land of dreams. And don't you find it kind of comical that you have so many people who like to criticize us and say how horrible we are and how we created all these problems, and yet all these people are trying to get in here and nobody's trying to get out. So, how does that make any sense? The fact of the matter is that it is a land of dreams. For me, that dream, of course, was to be a doctor. And it was the only thing I ever wanted to do, even as a young child. Skip right over policemen and firemen. Went straight to doctor. I loved it on television, Dr. Kildare, Dr. Casey, that kind. I even like going to the doctor's office. I would gladly sacrifice a shot just so I could smell those alcohol swabs, But, you probably wouldn't have thought that I was going to be a doctor because I was not a particularly good student. In fact, I was a horrible student. And, my mother was so disappointed that I was doing so poorly in school, and she just didn't know what to do. We lived in dire poverty, and she recognized that the way out was through education. And she did everything she could to try to make our lives as good as she could. She worked very hard, 2-3 jobs at a time as a domestic, cleaning other people's houses, doing whatever they didn't want to do, saving every penny, every dime. She would go to the Goodwill and buy a pair of trousers with a big hole in the knee, before that was fashionable. And she would buy patches and put them on there, and everybody would say, "Wow, where'd you get those? I want a pair like that." And, she would find these coupons. Sometimes we could get into the state fair free of charge. We would be so excited because we never had enough money to actually pay to get in there. But, wow, we would actually be in there, and you'd see everybody, and it was exciting. Never could ride any of the rides. But, you had to live vicariously watching other people. Could never buy any popcorn. I never tasted cotton candy until I was an adult, and it wasn't that good. But, she did everything she could, just to, sort of soften the blow. And she was just so disturbed that I was doing so poorly in school. My brother was doing poorly too. And so she prayed. And she asked God to give her the wisdom to know what to do, to get her young sons to understand the importance of intellectual development so that they could control their own lives. And that's the wonderful thing about God. You don't have to have a PhD to talk to him. You just have to have faith. And she had the faith that he would give her the wisdom, and he did, in her opinion. My brother and I didn't think it was that wise. Turning off the TV, what kind of wisdom is that? Making us read 2 books apiece from the Detroit Public Library and submit to her written book reports, which she couldn't read, but we didn't know that, And she would put check marks and highlights, underlines, and we would think she was reading them, but she wasn't. And I was outraged. Here I am stuck in a house reading books, and everybody else is outside playing and having a good time. And my mother's friends would say, "You can't make boys stay in the house reading books. They'll grow up and they'll hate you." And I would overhear them. I would say, "Mother, they're right." But, didn't matter. We still had to do it. But what a transformation. Because as I started reading, particularly about people of great accomplishment, I began to recognize an essential fact. And that is, the person who has the most to do with what happens to you in life is you. It's not somebody else. And once I understood that, my mother didn't have to make me do stuff, because I knew that despite all the negativity around me, that I could accomplish anything I wanted to as long as I was focused, as long as I was willing to put the effort behind it. It's what I call the can-do attitude. It is what propelled America to the pinnacle of the world so fast. One of the things that really impressed Alexis de Tocqueville when he came here in 1831 to study America, because the Europeans were just fascinated. How could a fledgling nation like this, barely 50 years old, already be competing with the powers of the world on almost every level? And he wanted to study it. But one of the things he looked at was education, and discovered that anybody finishing the second grade was completely literate. He could find a mountain man, the guy could read the newspaper, could tell him how the government worked. It was truly amazing. And that was really one of the things that propelled America so quickly. People knew how to do things. They knew how to build roads and structurally sound bridges and containment facilities and dams. They knew how to invent things to solve problems. That's how they were able to move from one ocean to the other ocean across a rugged and hostile terrain. It was that can-do attitude that is in the process of being replaced today by the what can you do for me attitude. And it is so important that we change that again. It is so important that we once again begin to emphasize education and make it available. And I mean all kinds of education. We have incredible universities like this one, but we also have a lot of professions that don't require a university. I was talking to a welding entrepreneur the other day. He was saying how much trouble he was finding people who could do welding. And he told me the salary that he started them off at, it kind of made my head spin, because I know a lot of people in college don't come out and make that kind of money. But, there's a whole host of things that we can be looking at rather than having people idle. Recognize that in this nation, we only have 330 million people. China and India have over 1 billion people each, and we have to compete with them on a global stage. That means we need to develop every single one of our people. We can't have a situation where 20% of people who go to high school don't finish. We can't have a situation where we have 5% of the world's population and 25% of the world's prisoners. This is not helpful to us in the long run. And we've got to start thinking in a corporate manner. Because for every one of those kids that we keep from going down that path of self-destruction, that's one less person that we have to be afraid of or protect our family from. One less person we have to pay for in the penal or the welfare system. One more tax-paying productive member of society who may discover a new energy source or the cure for cancer. We can't afford to throw any of our people away. We have to develop every single one of them. And that's how we become strong again. Now, let's talk for a minute about something that Bernie Sanders likes to talk about a lot, and Hillary Clinton likes to talk about a lot: the income gap. Why do we have this growing income gap? Now, they would have you believe it's because of rich people. and how they are doing bad things to poor people. Well, in a sense, they're right, but they're the rich people who are doing it. So that's the problem. Because you look at all these regulations. I mean, it was never intended that the government would be in every aspect of our lives, but they are in everything. Every single federal regulation costs money. Guess who gets to pay for that? The consumer. Goods and services increases the price. Doesn't hurt a rich person when they go into the store and a bar of soap has gone up by 10 cents, but it hurts a poor person. It hurts a middle-class person when they come to the register and they have a cart full of things, every one of which has gone up 10 cents, 15 cents, 20 cents. That drastically reduces the buying power. And most people have no idea what's going on. And then you look at the accumulated debt, $18+ trillion, half of which has been accumulated just in the last 7 years. Think about what that does. It makes it very difficult to raise interest rates. The Fed is caught between a rock and a hard place. You raise interest rates to a normal level with that kind of debt, the debt service on that is going to be astronomical. We wouldn't be able to afford it. So you have to keep it suppressed down near zero. Who does that hurt the most? Poor people and middle-class people who used to be able to increase their earnings by putting a portion of them in a savings account and watching it grow. That doesn't happen anymore. Or in the bond market. It doesn't happen anymore. They don't have any place to grow their money. That's devastating to the poor and the middle class in our country. And yet, you go and ask them about it, and they'll say, it's just a number. Don't worry about it. Is it just a number? $18 trillion? If you tried to pay that off at a rate of $10 million a day, 365 days a year, it would take you over 5,000 years. That is what we are putting on the backs of the next generation. How can we even look at ourselves in the mirror, knowing that we are absolutely destroying their future? And the sad thing is, many of them don't even know we're destroying their future. And we got to wake up the young people. All you young people, talk to your young people friends. Make sure that they know what is going on, that their future is being compromised by greedy people in my generation who are selfish and only care about themselves. They only want what they can have. They want it now, and the heck with anybody else. Those are not good people. They are not our friends. And we've got to start putting some pressure on them and letting them know that no, you will not stand for them to destroy your future because of their greed today. We simply cannot allow that to continue. But that's the good news. It's actually much worse than that. The fiscal gap. If you don't know what that is, please look it up when you go home. It's very important. Every single American must understand what the fiscal gap is. It is the unfunded liabilities that we owe. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all of those government agencies and departments, all of the money that we owe going into the future, something we call infinite horizon, versus what we expect to collect from taxes and other revenue sources. Those numbers should be pretty close together if you're fiscally responsible. If you're not, there's a gap. Bring it forward to today's dollars, it's known as the fiscal gap. Right now it sits at over $200 trillion. Somebody has to be responsible for that. I mean, that is a number that is incomprehensible. And we just continue to multiply it. I mean, the recent deal between the president and Congress to raise the debt ceiling even more. It's just a number. It doesn't mean anything. Are you kidding me? The only reason that we can sustain the level of debt that we have is because we can print money. Our currency is the reserve currency of the world. It's a title that generally goes with the number one economy in the world, which we have been since the 1870s until last year. Now we're in a struggle with China for that position. It looks like they've recently passed us up. We may not always be the reserve currency. That's the issue. If tomorrow we were not the reserve currency and we couldn't print money, albeit irresponsibly, as we are, our economy would collapse overnight. What happened in 1929 on Wall Street would be a walk in the park compared to what would happen to us. This is a warning. You know, before horrible things happen, usually there is a warning. This is the warning. It is imperative that we make sure that we all know what's going on. And that way, when somebody comes along, a politician, and says, free college for everyone, you know how to evaluate that. And you know that right now, there is nothing free. When you have that kind of debt, there is nothing that is free. And we're going to have to start doing things to reverse this. First of all, we have this gigantic bloated government. I would declare a moratorium on hiring because we have 4.1 million federal employees. We do not need 4.1 federal employees. You know? And I would just let them retire. They retire, thousands of them every year. Just don't replace them. You can shift people around. There's 645 federal agencies and sub-agencies. No one can convince me that there isn't fat in every single one of them. And I would require a certain percentage of that fat to be cut out of every single one of them. That's going to reduce the cost very significantly. And I would make sure that we have a taxation system that is fair. You know, we have the highest corporate tax rates in the developed world. And even in the non-developed world, there are only two places that have taxes higher, Chad and the UAE. I mean, it is absurd. And what I would do is declare a tax holiday for 6 months so that we could repatriate the over $2.1 trillion overseas that's not being brought back because of the high corporate tax rate. Let that come back here without taxes, and the only requirement would be that 10% of it has to be used in enterprise zones to create jobs for unemployed people and people on welfare. You want to talk about a stimulus. That would be the biggest stimulus since FDR's great New Deal, and it wouldn't cost the taxpayers one penny. You know, that's the kind of thing. That's the kind of low-hanging fruit that makes a difference. And it also gets our businesses into the mindset of reaching out and investing in the people around them. And that's the way it used to be in America before the government decided that it would be the great savior and take care of everybody. You know, and you know, the Great Society of Lyndon Johnson, we were going to eliminate poverty. $19 trillion later, we have 10 times more people on food stamps, more poverty, welfare, crime, incarceration, out-of-wedlock births. Everything that was supposed to be better is not only worse, it's much worse. Now, I don't want to demonize the government, but they deserve it. But the fact of the matter is, they don't do a good job. The people who do a good job are us. And I've spoken at lots of different programs, including the Save Our Youth program here in Denver, where individuals become mentors for students who are heading in the wrong direction. Bring them into their own world, teach them things that they would never have known. And almost all of those kids graduate from high school. Many of them go on to college and do very useful things where the trajectory was just the opposite direction. This is what happens when people invest in people. And that's one of the ways that we got to the pinnacle so quickly, because we cared about each other. And this is a vital part of who we are. And we have to stop allowing the agents of hatred and division to prevail in our society. And what they have done is they have tried to convince people that we're all each other's enemies. And there's a war on women, and racial wars, and income wars, and age wars, and religious wars, and every war you can imagine. It's not true. We, the American people, are not each other's enemies. The enemies are those who are trying to make us think we're enemies. That's the problem. And there's a reason we're called the United States of America and not the divided States of America. And this nation, believe me, was designed for we the people and around we the people, not we the government. The government is there to facilitate life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for us. Citizen statesmen, not career politicians. That's what it was designed for. And I love it when people come up to me and they say, but you've never been elected to any public office. You can't possibly know how to do anything. Well, let me tell you something. The Ark was built by amateurs. The Titanic was built by professionals. And I'm going to open it up for a few questions in a moment, but just in closing, we live in a very dangerous world right now, and we need a government that understands that. Not one that won't even mention the name of our enemies, of people like the global jihadists who want to destroy us. But we cannot engage in destroying ourselves. We have to have unity, and we must use our collective strength the way we have in the past. And we must be able to think proactively, understand that we are very vulnerable. Our electric grid, can be attacked so easily. And then that would put us in a very vulnerable position. Cybersecurity is vital. We have to, ramp up very quickly, particularly in defensive capabilities. And we must be willing to use our cyber offensive capabilities. I mean, if somebody hits us with a cyber attack, we have to hit them back so hard that they will not recover in a year, And I'm a nice guy. So, but peace comes through strength. And also, we must stop listening to the secular progressives who are trying to kick God out of our country. We are a Judeo-Christian foundation. And they say you can't talk about God in public. Somehow we got to sanitize all that. Well, I got a good suggestion for them. Take your wallet out and look at all of that money. It all says, in God we trust. So since you don't like God, just give me your money. But if we're willing to stand up for what we believe like those who preceded us stood up, can you imagine what we can do in our nation? We can do the same thing that they did. They didn't like what King George III was doing. They would have town meetings, and they would get everybody together. They even invited the Loyalists, and they said, what kind of country do you want to have? What do you want to pass on to your children? What are you willing to fight for? What are you willing to die for? And now it's our turn. And now we have to ask ourselves that question. And it's not about being comfortable. And it's not about no one ever calling you your name. It's about saving the future for our children. Thank you. Okay.
Hello. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce myself. I'm Candy Carson, and I approve this message.
All right, now, a question.
All right. So last night during the CNBC debate, there was a particular moderator that was quite harsh on you regarding your economic and fiscal policy and all the numbers. Would you mind going into a little bit more specifics regarding your economic policy?
Sure. We were talking about my taxation program, and they said, no way, the numbers don't add up. Well, they add up perfectly fine. Our federal budget, right around $3.5 trillion. That's a big federal budget. You're talking about a GDP of around $18 trillion. If you tax that at a 15% rate, that yields $2.7 trillion. So you're only $800 billion away from parity. And we still haven't taxed capital gains at 15%. Or corporate profits at 15%. That will make up a lot of the difference. But in addition to that, think about this. There is so much waste in our system. It is mind-boggling. And by not increasing the federal hiring and by requiring every division of the government to cut their budget by 2 to 3%, you are going to cut an enormous amount of waste out. Now, the way I would do it is I would tell the leaders of each department, you're required to cut this out. And if you cut it out in a way that hurts the populace, which is what happened the last time with the sequester, they looked for the most painful things they could do so they could say, see, we can't cut any money out. I will tell them that if they do that, they're gone immediately. It's as simple as that. The other thing that I would do is I would get the most powerful economic engine the world's ever known rolling again by getting rid of useless regulations, and by that I mean doing a cost-benefit analysis on every single one of them. And if the benefit is not greater than the cost, zippo, it's gone. Okay? And also utilizing our natural resources. I would use the EPA, change its mission, and probably change a lot of its personnel. And they would work with business with industry, with agriculture, to find the cleanest, most environmentally friendly ways to do things, rather than how to suppress and harass people. And that's going to get us moving a lot further, a lot faster. These are simple things, but they will work very well.
Thank you, Dr. Carson. I just wanted to ask you, from having a very unique set of experiences, what would be your prescription to America for improving our physical health, particularly since we are a nation that has skyrocketing healthcare costs, and quite frankly, why are they so expensive?
Okay. Well, first of all, I would try to put healthcare back in the hands of the people. You know, as everybody knows, I don't like the so-called Affordable Care Act. The reason I don't like it, it's not because it doesn't work and not because it's not affordable, but the reason I don't like it is because this is a country that is supposed to be of, for, and by the people. And the government is supposed to be here to facilitate life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but with the Affordable Care Act, the government comes along and it says, we don't care what you, the people, think. This is what we're doing. We're shoving it down your throat, and if you don't like it, too bad. Well, that is antithetical to the very concepts that created this nation. And if we continue to accept that, we will accept anything. And that's why I rail against it so hard. We cannot allow the government to control our lives like that. So what I have proposed instead is a health savings account system. People get them from the day they're born. They keep them until they die. They can pass them on when they die to their family. And we pay for it with the very same dollars that we pay for traditional health care with. We spend twice as much per capita on health care as many other countries. So we have a lot of money in the system. It's just used in a very inefficient way. And you give people the ability to shift money in their HSA among family members. So, you know, your mom could give it to you, your wife, your daughter, your uncle, your cousin, anybody. It gives you enormous flexibility to cover almost anything that comes up, except for catastrophic things. And you have catastrophic insurance for that, which is much cheaper because the only thing coming out of it is real catastrophic health issues. How often do those occur? Not very often. So it's like a homeowner's policy with a big deductible versus a homeowner's policy where you want every scratch covered. Two completely different animals. It makes a huge difference. And it also, because the relationship now is between you and the healthcare system, it brings clarity and transparency and quality. All of those are the kinds of things that are not going to be seen in a massive bureaucratic system like what we have now. Now, that takes care of 75% of the people. It doesn't take care of the indigent. And what are we going to do about them? Well, how do we take care of them now? Medicaid. Annual Medicaid budget, $400 to $500 billion a year. How many people participate? About 80 million, which is way too many, but that's another issue that can be taken care of by fixing the economy and giving them opportunities. But let's deal with what we have. 80 million into 400 billion, 5,000. $5,000 each man, woman, and child per year. What could you buy with that? A concierge practice, boutique practice that rich people buy, typically $2,000 to $3,000 a year. And then you still got thousands left over to buy your catastrophic insurance, which is much cheaper now because of the way that the system works. And some people say that'll never work because poor people are not capable of managing their own health care. You can't give them control of a health savings account. Well, you know, people in Washington always say things like that so that they can be in control. They think everybody's just like they are. But anyway, But the fact of the matter is, they said that about food stamps too, and people learn very quickly how to use food stamps, and they would learn how to use a health savings account too. And when Mr. Jones has that diabetic foot ulcer, he will learn quickly not to go to the emergency room where it costs 5 times more than the clinic. He's going to go to the clinic. In the clinic, they fix him up. And they say, now let's get your diabetes under control so you're not back here in 3 weeks with another problem. A whole nother level of savings that we as a society are not realizing. Plus, we're teaching Mr. Jones the whole concept of personal responsibility versus dependency. And that's what we have to do. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Carson. I'm a citizen that tries to live by the law conscientiously and not do anything illegal. That frightens me. I don't want to do anything illegal, whether it's local, state, and especially federal. But it's provoking to me to hear constantly on the news that states are breaking federal laws, politicians breaking federal laws. There's illegality in immigration. Why is there not action against these illegalities when we, the average citizen, would pay tooth and nail for breaking the law?
Yeah, good question. And I've been told that that has to be the last question, just for those who are standing. Well, first of all, we are a nation of laws, or at least we used to be. Before we had a Justice Department and an executive branch that decided that it wants to pick and choose the laws that it wants to enforce. I was flabbergasted, my wife and I, when we went down to the Arizona border with Mexico a few months ago and saw what was going on there. I mean, was there a fence? Yeah. But, it's the kind of fence when I was a kid, I don't think it would even slow me down. It's ridiculous. And there weren't any border guards. Why have border guards if they're not on the border? They were like 70 miles inland. That doesn't do any good. There was one place where there was a big hole cut in the fence, and they had repaired it with a couple of strings of barbed wire. And, the cameramen who were with us, they wanted to shoot from the Mexican side, so they just went through right there, And they were not athletic people, so, that's how easy it is to get across the border. It's just craziness. And so those are laws that we do need to enforce. If you look at Yuma County in Arizona, they were able to cut the illegal immigration traffic by 97%. And how did they do it? They had a fence, a double fence, with an asphalt road in between, so there was quick access. They actually had border guards on the border, imagine that. And they prosecuted first-time offenders rather than the catch and release program that we have today. And that was not with utilizing sensory technology and drone surveillance and things like that. 97%. That program was largely gutted, and for some reason, the DOJ just didn't seem to want to have that going on. And now we have basically a highway of illegal drug trafficking as well as people trafficking. We have people coming in here from multiple other countries. It's ridiculous. So I believe it is possible to seal the border within 1 year. And I do believe that, if you turn off the spigot that dispenses the goodies, there won't be any reason for anybody to try to come over here. And then I believe that we do have to deal with the millions and millions of people who are here already. I think if they have a pristine record and they would like to stay, they have to register within a defined period of time. I would make it 6 months. They have to pay a back tax penalty. They have to pay taxes going forward. They are not citizens, and they don't get to vote. and they have to work somewhere where we want them to work. And it's important to recognize that some of the industries in this country very much depend on that labor, and they would collapse almost immediately without it. But it can only be done by people who are here in a legal manner. And it is not an amnesty program because it does not make people citizens. It does not give people the vote. So when you hear people saying Carson wants amnesty, that's not true. What Carson wants is practicality, things that actually work for us. And we're also reasonable people. One of the things that I think is very important in terms of our foreign policy is not to be giving billions of dollars to other people in foreign aid, which we borrow from China and we pay the interest and then we give it to somebody else. That doesn't make any sense. But we should be supplying foreign aid. Like in Cameroon right now, American companies over there helping to develop millions of acres of incredibly fertile land, and they're getting record crops and they're making big profits. At the meantime, they're building the infrastructure of that country, and they're providing jobs there, and they're teaching people there the ag business so that they can do it for themselves. And there's no reason that we can't do that in Central America and South America also, so that they can begin to prosper, and our companies will prosper in the meantime, and they won't feel that they need to come here. And I think that's the kind of leadership that we should show in the United States. All right, thank you all very much.